The purpose of this program of events is to help managers, board members, those involved with policy, to try and look forward as we come out of COVID and what direction their organizations might take and what might be the organizing principles that guide them. So what do I mean by organizing principles? Well, if you imagine back to the days when Mrs. Thatcher came into power, she clearly did have organizing principles. She thought the private sector was best. She wanted to privatize a lot of assets and hand them over to people, council houses, for example. She wanted to change the way things were run and started off a process whereby schools and academies became more self-managing. They wanted to bring in contracting and competitive tendering. They may have started off with Peter Levine in the Defence Department, but those of us that are old enough remember Roy Griffiths in the NHS and the start of general management. But Blair and co carried on with ideas about best value, about regulation, and lots of other organising principles that they brought to bear on government, believing that that was the best way to mobilise, motivate management, and to handle assets and people. And are we at a turning point again? Well, it's a week since we had lockdown and COVID, a year rather, not a week, this week last year, when most senior managers would have been looking forward to the start of the new financial year at the beginning of April, but they just had to tear up all their business plans and start coping with what was being thrown at them. And we've seen an extraordinary period of change, all very widely debated inside the media at the moment, the shift to digital, working from home, the improvement in the use of technology, but also a lot of issues about how that is going to translate when people have a choice about where they work and when organizations look at going back to something more normal. And of course, we must not forget that for a great many people, there's never been any option of working from home, whether it's bus drivers, the bin men who've kept things going, nurses, people in blue collar and manufacturing jobs. There's never really been that option. And yet even their jobs and their industries have been dramatically changed. So are we at risk of wishful thinking, looking at the things that have happened and becoming dreamers? Could that be damaging if everyone rushed out and tried to tell all their staff at home? So how do we figure out what really has substance behind it for the legacy coming out of COVID? But I think people also need to be aware that the government is planning to come out of COVID, because the second strand is not just recovering from this pandemic. The government itself has been virtually on hold since its first day and has not been able to launch many of the reforms and other ideas. So when we come out, hopefully sometime in May and June, we'll not only have the end of the pandemic, but we'll have a new Queen's speech. We are looking forward to a spending review, which has been postponed. We know that the budget situations are going to be extremely tight. But at the same time, we are seeing signs that the organising principle might involve more of a role for the state, even under a Conservative government, more co-production, the success of working between Oxford University and AstraZeneca, more emphasis on place, especially with the emergence of the new elected mayors, part of whose job is to try and tie things together locally and regionally. So what are the things we have learned? What are the guiding principles that if you are a senior manager and you're dusting off that business plan and trying to figure out what you should be saying to your first board meeting in late May or June, looking ahead to the next year or 2 years? How can you make changes to your assumptions about how your people work for you, how your assets are moved around? And how are your clients and your customers and your consumers going to behave? What will they accept? What kind of contract will you have with them? So that's the easy agenda for people. It is an extraordinary confluence of things. And I've managed to get this far without even mentioning Brexit or the huge supertanker stuck in the Suez Canal. What other black swans might visit us as we try and rearrange our supply chains and our relationship with the rest of the world? So lots to talk about.